Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Volunteer Technologist podcast. Here we take a look at the different ways that people who are technically inclined volunteer outside of their primary job. Today I'm joined by Anita Ihuman. How are you doing today?
Fine, thank you, Jane. Hello.
It's nice to meet you. Would
Same
you
here.
would you take a moment and introduce yourself to our listeners?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, hello, everyone. I am Anita Ihuman. I am a developer advocate at a company called Metal Beer. And on the side, I am also doing a lot of things in open source, from community management to building programs to contributing to research efforts and so many other awesome stuff that I would love to share here today.
That sounds pretty interesting. So let's maybe start with the first one you mentioned with some of the open source community work that you're doing. What are you doing in that regards?
Yes, so I am currently on the CHAOSS board of directors, and I got there as a result of my contributions to the chaos community and in leading efforts around onboarding, documentation, helping other persons get involved, and so many other areas like that. I also contribute to another open source community called Layer 5 as a community manager, where I also get people settled in with the project and also navigate their way around the cloud native community. And yeah, that's just about the community aspect of it.
So you mentioned the Chaos Board of Directors. Can you tell me what Chaos is? I'm not familiar with that.
It's a community that is focused on developing metrics and analytics around open source community health, right? So
Hmm.
the abbreviation itself stands for community health analytics in open source software. And that's like the long form for chaos. It's a project under the Linus Foundation. And so it has a bunch of other branches within the project, but its core purpose is developing metrics models, and softwares that also supports open source community health and standards.
So the Chaos Project sounds like a pretty cool one. What kind of things are you actually doing with it?
Okay, so within the chaos community, I am part of the DEI working group where we develop metrics around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And some other things that we do within the working group is develop initiatives like the popular um, event badging initiatives that a lot of open source events tend to have received badges for their DEI efforts for the various events. We recently launched another initiatives, the project DEI project initiative, to also badge open source projects for their DEI efforts. And on the side, we also do a bit of research to understand how open source communities and diversity, equity, and inclusion come to play.
That's very important work. I'm glad to hear that y'all are working on it and putting a real focus on it. You mentioned getting different badges. What does a project or a community have to do to get one of those badges?
Well, honestly, it just involve or revolves around how intentional the project is about the inclusivity, and then how much effort is put into achieving those intentions. And so we just bring our metrics to help us give the community organizers or the community maintainers um, a um a picture so they can reflect on their efforts, right? So our metrics are more of like a mirror for them to look into and say, okay, this is how much we have done in terms of DEI, looking at these chaos metrics. This is how much we have done. This is where we're at, and this is where we can also improve in terms of our diversity and inclusion within our community. So that is what the badges basically are used for, or basically signify.
That's pretty cool. You mentioned doing some research with related to that. What kind of research do you do?
Right. So sometime last year we did a research to help us understand the impact of these metrics, these DEI metrics that we have developed, because we have like over 200 metrics as of now, and we weren't quite sure how impactful it was in real time, especially to the persons that these metrics were developed for, which are individuals who identify with underrepresented groups. And as a result, we're not sure how effective our metrics were, and we had to go out to find out with like our interview campaign. And so that brought about the research study, and we were able to come to a good understanding on how we can improve, and how well we are doing with this study.
Very cool. I'm guessing that that's leads into some of the community building stuff that you're talking about doing. What kind of community building and um, related things are you working with?
So I mentioned earlier the layer 5 community. So I have been part of that community for like quite some time, mostly because my open source journey started from there. And so I got involved in as one of those interested in contributing to the project. But then I also realized that I could also offer help. And so I got into mentoring other persons, onboarding other persons, also managing efforts around making sure that the community, scales, and also every other thing involving getting people started when they jump into the community and all of that. So mostly that is what I do within the layer 5 community. And then on the side, I am also managing another DEI working group under the open source the sustain open source community. So basically we just started sometime last year to discuss how sustain can get involved in the diversity and inclusion discussions, how we can drive efforts around that. And we recently started working on like a DEI handbook that can also serve as a reference for open source leaders who are willing to, get into this topic of DEI and also implement it within their communities. It's more like a guide that people could also use whenever they feel like they want to know or want to find out more about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
It's pretty cool. What kind of things are you doing with regards to mentoring?
All right, so I think that's more on, so on the side, yeah. On the side, I am a technical writer, and so I do a lot of writing, from documentations to articles and so much more. And so in terms of mentoring, I have worked with some open source contributors to get them into contributing to the documentation aspect of projects, how they can contribute, pointing them to areas that they can improve on their general writing skills. And within layer 5 community, I was able to get so many persons engaged by developing the community handbook, which today is like the primary onboarding tool that a lot of persons are getting involved in. And so we were able to put together the community handbook and have it uploaded. And I think that was part of like the mentorship. Other than that, I serve as there's this program called a Meshmates within the layer 5 community, and it's like a pair mentorship program where you're paired up with someone to who is more experienced to point you to directions that you're not very familiar with. And so I was one of the mesh mates within the layer 5 community, helping persons to navigate the project and also get involved with the contributing aspects of it.
That sounds pretty cool. Um, can you enlighten me on exactly what the Layer 5 project is? Or
Yeah, so Layer 5 is a community, an open source community that develops cloud native solutions. And one of its popular too is probably Meshry, a cloud native management platform where you can like view a variety of cloud native tools, look at which one is more compatible for your software and all of that. So Layer 5 offers like a bunch of solutions, basically focused towards cloud native technologies and all of that. And so that's what they do.
gotcha. So, what got you into doing all this different volunteer work around the organizing and all of the other stuff?
Well, at first, like every person who is trying to upskill, it was the need to get hands-on experience, but from real-time projects, right? And along the way, it became more of making impact and making a difference in these various communities. Like in layer 5, I got hung on the idea that I can also get into the cloud native ecosystem. And so that helped me in one way or another increase my knowledge on topics around DevOps, cloud computing, and also gave me the drive to want to learn more by taking certifications and all that. And which today I write mostly about as a technical writer. And for the chaos community, it was more on making a difference because while contributing to these various communities, right, I could see areas that so many persons were, disadvantaged as a result of, certain biases or certain inequalities and difference as a result of their differences generally. And when I came across the chaos community to, help community health at large, I just knew that it was going to be the right place for me to put this knowledge that I have gained from other people's experiences and make sure less people experience this. And I think Chaos is doing an awesome job with that, with their metrics. And I decided to take some of the knowledge that I have from working with the Chaos community to the Sustain OSS, where I'm currently working with a DEI working group and all.
That's really cool. How receptive have you found the different open source projects being to finding out that there are ways that they could improve, or that someone is coming in and recommending some improvements to the way they interact with their community?
From a personal experience, I think communities have been open to, accept feedback, have been open to change, mostly because these communities have already realized that there are existing problems that they need help with. And so most of the ideas that I have brought up within these communities are like ideas that fix some of these existing challenges. And so I think they have been so receptive towards these topics that or suggestions that I bring up from my experience.
That's really good. I know that's not always the case. I've not personally experienced it, but I've read various tech articles about communities that were not very open to change or not open to the feedback, and of course, those communities, generally speaking, end up not surviving the long term. The people who are doing the work usually end up just going somewhere else. So
Well, yeah, those communities exist, but something that I got to learn as during the course of that research study with chaos is most of these communities that are not very receptive to change are often larger communities that have have been built a long time ago, and these topics of DEI were not a thing as at the time, but then they survived through that period. And so it's more difficult for them to, open up to the change and to topics like this, because there's always this notion that if I existed through this phase without this, what makes you think I can make it through the next phase um, without it as well, right? And so, like, from the what I gained through that research is newer open source communities are a lot more receptive to topics like this, in new opinions, a lot more than the older and larger open source communities.
With the older communities, have you and the group started finding ways to show them the value and why they should care about it? Is that where some of the metrics come in?
Yes, very correct. That's where some of the metrics come in, and also discussing more on ways that research could come into play to showcase how DEI in general can impact open source communities. I feel like there are a lot of research studies that showcase the disparities that exist within communities, the inequalities that exist, but they very few of these research studies capture how much growth comes from open source communities that have accepted some of these topics, right? And I think research is a way that could also be used to show, because a lot of persons rely on facts. They want to see, okay, where is the evidence?
Oh,
How much have
absolutely.
they grown? Right. So how much growth was there, and how were they before this topic was introduced? So, like, having that fact readily available could help a lot of persons, change their notion on these ideologies generally.
And that kind of makes sense, especially in an open source community. A lot of times it's very data driven, be it the data from the pull request or issues that are opened or the data from the track record of how things have been going. And with no data, it's just one person's opinion, until proven otherwise a lot of times. So that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So I had one other question for you. I noticed from our conversations before the recording that you're located in Nigeria, and so many of the projects, at least the ones I'm aware of, kind of seem to be focused around either the United States or somewhere in Europe. How have you found it working with projects that are both geographically in a very different spot and frequently in a very different time zone than where you are, both from a just dealing with the time differences and from a different cultures, because so many of times these projects also reflect the cultures of where they're kind of founded out of?
Right. That's an interesting question. And to be honest, at first I found it challenging. Like the first 1 year to 2 year, I was still trying to figure out the time differences, how to communicate so it doesn't come off as offensive. Because there's certain ways you would communicate to someone from Nigeria that a lot other persons will see as, oh, that is offensive. And I didn't realize that, but getting into the open source community, I was like, oh, so this is a problem. I have to adjust to it. And then the time differences, sometimes you feel like, oh, this time is convenient for a call, and then you check the time and it's like 2 a.m. my hour, and
Yeah, that
I
that
have
does make for a little bit of an awkward conversation at 2 in the morning.
right. And then I have to, okay, should I stay up to 2 a.m. or I should just, let it go and catch up? But I figured that having to bring up these differences made the concept of open source more open source. Because introducing that, okay, these things are different from my own point of view or from where I'm from, made some of these open source communities adjust to contributors from this part of the world as well. Like for chaos community, we had to create a group called the Chaos Africa, specific to support more persons that are coming from the African ecosystem. So we have Chaos Africa, persons from Angola, persons from Rwanda, Kenya, so many other African countries, and not just Nigeria. And so it's a lot easier for us to relate amongst ourselves and make contributions because we can relate to it. And then we take some of these contributions to the general community when the meeting times are aligned with ours and everything like that. And for other communities, you just have to learn to communicate your differences, and so the community is able to also adjust to it. And I've seen that for some of these communities like layer 5, I witnessed that there was a lot of improvement to the code of conduct to adjust to make other persons more comfortable, to make more other persons also more feel more welcomed and supported within the community. Because sometimes you jump on an issue and then the maintainer doesn't reply till like after 12 hours, and you feel like, oh, maybe they're not replying because I am from this part of the world and they don't support me or they don't accept me. But that's not the case, right? It's just a time difference. You probably didn't know that. And so having to like adjust the code of conduct and also get maintainers from different parts of the world made it easy for us to collaborate, and also like for me to also bring in more persons that are willing to contribute to these communities from my own part of getting into the community.
Yeah, I really like the ideas you were talking about there because what kind of went through my head is it's making open source open to everyone, not just to the little area that it started out in, and that's a very good thing. The diversity through a project makes for a much better outcome in general.
Right.
Cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Jean. This was an interesting
I
conversation.
agree, but an enlightening one also.
Right.
Before we go, I'd like to thank those of you who have boosted in support for the show. It is very much appreciated. This is a value for value podcast, which means I rely on listeners like yourself contributing back to fund it. As such, I'll never charge you to listen, but producing and hosting it does cost money. If you got value from this episode, I ask that you contribute by sending a boost through a modern podcast app like Fountain or Cast-O-Matic, or via the Support the Show link in the show notes that are visible in your podcast app. You can also find the show notes and transcripts at volunteertechnologist.com. If you would like to come on the show or know someone I should reach out to about being on the show, please send me a message via one of the links at the bottom of the show notes. Thanks for listening.